Black boy says I can make you walk again. The old judge laughs until a miracle unfolds. An 83-year-old former judge, once feared, now forgotten, sits alone in silence, haunted by past mistakes and paralyzed both in body and soul. Then one day, a mysterious barefoot boy appears, calling her by name and claiming he can help her walk again, not with medicine, but with truth. What unfolds next is a stunning journey of guilt, redemption, and the miraculous power of honesty. Who is this boy, and why does he know so much about her buried past? Where in the world are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe for more unforgettable stories that heal, inspire, and awaken. Evelyn Monroe had once commanded courtrooms with the sheer weight of her voice. She didn't need to raise it. Her words, precise and sharp as a blade, could slice through any defense. She'd presided over some of the country's most high-profile trials as a Supreme Court judge, earning the nickname the Iron Gavel from both admirers and enemies. But now, at 83, her voice was rarely heard outside the high walls of her secluded home, nestled in the sleepy hills of Fallridge. Time had not simply aged Evelyn. It had fractured her, peeled away every layer of pride, power, and purpose until all that remained was a shell of who she once was. A woman in a wheelchair, speaking to no one, waiting for nothing. The once grand Monroe estate was now more memory than mansion. Ivy crawled like veins across the stone facade, and the great iron gates remained perpetually closed, a fortress against a world she had long since dismissed. Evelyn lived alone with a rotating team of caregivers, none of whom stayed longer than a few weeks. They left quietly, often citing family emergencies or sudden illnesses. The truth was always the same. The woman who once judged the hearts of others had become impenetrable. Cold, hollow. She rarely spoke more than a few words, and when she did, they dripped with sarcasm or indifference. Every day at precisely 4 Honkay p.m., her wheelchair was rolled out onto the garden path, not by request, but out of routine. She would sit near the old fountain, beneath the same sycamore tree that her daughter Elise used to climb before the world cracked open. The birds chirped, the water trickled, and the breeze carried whispers she no longer had the energy to chase. Evelyn stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy, as if replaying scenes only she could see. Sometimes she muttered things, fragments of courtroom statements, pieces of lullabies she once sang. But mostly she remained silent, a monument to grief. On that particular Tuesday, the sky had the kind of golden hue that made even weeds look divine. The scent of lavender hovered in the air, and somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played faintly through a neighbor's open window. Evelyn didn't notice. She didn't notice much these days. Her caregiver, Marla, had gone inside to fetch her usual peppermint tea. Evelyn's hands rested loosely on her lap, thin fingers curled slightly like drying leaves. She blinked, slowly, rhythmically, lost in some silent argument with God she'd been rehearsing for years. Then, the crunch of footsteps on gravel disturbed the stillness. At first, she thought it might be Marla returning, but the steps were lighter, uncertain, almost barefoot? She turned her head with effort, expecting to see a jogger or a child chasing a ball from the neighboring house. Instead, what she saw made her frown. A boy, no older than 10, thin, dark-skinned, wearing a tattered navy hoodie 2 sizes too large and shorts that barely clung to his hips. His sandals were mismatched, one blue, one brown, and both were falling apart. Dust coated his legs, and his knobby knees peeked out like they'd seen more miles than a truck tire. His hair was unruly, curls tangled into chaotic shapes, but his eyes, those deep-set, gentle eyes, were steady, watching her. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "Are you Evelyn?" Evelyn's brow tightened. "Who are you?" she snapped, sharper than she intended. "You shouldn't be here. This is private property." The boy didn't flinch. He stepped closer, hands visible, palms open at his sides like he was approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I was walking through the park and I saw you sitting here. I thought maybe you'd like some company." "Company?" she echoed, incredulous. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. That answer rattled her. She felt her pulse quicken, a mix of fear and something else. Intrigue? No, that was a younger woman's word. Evelyn Monroe no longer entertained intrigue, only facts, only caution. "I could call security," she said coldly. The boy shrugged. "You could, but you won't." The audacity. Evelyn opened her mouth to dismiss him, but her voice got caught in her throat. Something about his presence was unsettling. Not in a threatening way, but in the way an old song you haven't heard in decades might break you with a single note. He wasn't dirty in the way most lost boys were. There was a kind of grace to him, like someone who had slept under stars by choice, not by misfortune. "What's your name?" she asked finally. He smiled, revealing a chipped front tooth. "Micah." "Micah," she repeated. "Biblical." He nodded. "It means, 'Who is like God?' My mom picked it before she passed." Evelyn looked away. The wind shifted. The trees groaned slightly. "I don't talk to strangers," she muttered. "Then I won't be one," Micah said, and before she could protest he sat down beside her, on the cold stone ledge, cross-legged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I used to come here with my dad," he said after a long silence. "He liked the fountain, said it made the world feel slower." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "This isn't a therapy session." Micah didn't respond. He just stared at the water, the light bouncing off his face like a soft spotlight. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Do you ever feel like the world kept moving and forgot to take you with it?" The question hit her like a slap. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred slightly, but she didn't cry. Evelyn Monroe did not cry in front of anyone, not even when her husband's blood stained the kitchen floor, not even when Elisa's casket was lowered into the earth. "You don't know anything about my life," she whispered, voice shaking in spite of herself. Micah nodded slowly. "No, but I know what loneliness looks like." Evelyn's knuckles turned white against the armrest of her chair. Her heart pounded in her ears. The boy was too perceptive, too calm, too familiar. "Did someone send you?" she asked, suddenly suspicious. "Are you one of those YouTubers trying to bait an old woman into crying on camera for views?" Micah shook his head. "I don't need a camera to see someone hurting." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, like fog, full of unspoken stories and long-shelved regrets. Evelyn didn't realize she was gripping the wheel of her chair until her hand began to ache. She looked down at it, thin, veined, shaking. Micah stood up, brushing off invisible dust from his hoodie. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow," he said casually, like he'd been doing this for weeks. "I didn't say you could come back. You didn't say I couldn't." And with that, he turned and walked off, sandals flapping, his silhouette framed by the last gold light of the day. Evelyn sat there long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. The tea Marla brought was cold by the time she returned. She said nothing about the boy, not because she didn't want to explain, but because she didn't know how. That night, for the first time in nearly 2 years, Evelyn Monroe didn't turn on the TV, didn't open a law journal, didn't drown her thoughts in documentaries or prescription sleep aids. Instead, she lay in bed with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, whispering one word: "Micah." She said it like a question, like a secret, like a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. And somewhere, deep within her bones, a place long frozen by guilt and rage, stirred. The next day came with a heaviness in the air, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Evelyn Monroe didn't sleep much, but sleep wasn't something she expected anymore. She had drifted in and out of strange dreams. One where the courtroom was on fire and she sat calmly in the judge's seat while everything around her burned. Another where her daughter Elise was whispering through the walls, but Evelyn could never catch the words. She woke before dawn, eyes dry, heart restless. By noon, the usual rituals had begun. Breakfast untouched. Pills taken. TV humming nonsense in the background. Marla offered to wheel her out at the usual time, but Evelyn refused. At 3:30, she asked to be taken out. Marla blinked, startled, but didn't question it. Evelyn didn't make requests. She gave orders, or said nothing at all. Now she was requesting. The garden looked the same, but somehow more vivid. The sun was lower today, casting longer shadows. The wind carried the smell of wild mint from the forest edge, and the old fountain burbled as always. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly on the armrests. She told herself she was here for fresh air. That was all. But her eyes betrayed her. They kept glancing toward the trail, toward the bend in the path where the boy had appeared yesterday. She hated herself for it. What was she expecting? A child in tattered clothes with a mouthful of metaphors and a halo of confidence? Ridiculous. Yet there she sat, eyes fixed, waiting for something she couldn't name. And then she heard it. That same soft crunch of gravel under light footsteps. Her spine stiffened. She didn't turn right away. Let him come to me, she thought. I won't look desperate. She was already furious at herself for the anticipation clawing at her chest. When she did finally glance over, there he was. Micah. Same mismatched sandals. Same dusty hoodie. Same expression like he'd seen every heartbreak in the world and made peace with it. I didn't think you'd come, he said, dropping to sit on the stone edge of the fountain again. I didn't either, Evelyn replied, voice hoarse from disuse. She cleared her throat. But the air's better here than in the house. Sure, he said, smiling faintly. Let's go with that. They sat in silence for a moment. The birds chattered in the trees. A squirrel darted across the path. Micah didn't reach for her hand this time. He simply stared out over the pond like he belonged there more than she did. You said yesterday, Evelyn began, not looking at him, that you saw me hurting. Micah nodded once. People see old women in wheelchairs all the time and think they're hurting. It's not special. He tilted his head. It wasn't the chair that told me. What was it then? Your eyes, he said. You look like you've been carrying a scream inside for so long it turned into stone. She almost laughed. Almost. But it caught in her throat and came out as a breathy scoff. That poetic nonsense works on your school friends? I don't go to school, he replied flatly. She turned to him now, studied him closer. You're truant? He shrugged. Sort of. I don't have anywhere to be. You live around here? He didn't answer, not with words. Who do you live with? No one, he said quietly. Not anymore. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She told herself it was indigestion. So, you're a runaway. Not really. More like a guest of the world. That sounds like a lie poor people tell themselves to feel noble. He smiled without offense. Maybe. Or maybe some people are just passing through. I don't like riddles? Then maybe you'll like truth, he said, reaching into the pocket of his hoodie. She flinched slightly, a reflex she'd developed after a lifetime of courtrooms, defendants, and unhinged threats. But all he pulled out was a folded piece of paper. Worn. Soft at the edges. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers just barely. What's this? She asked warily. Something you forgot. I don't forget. You forgot this. With slow fingers, she unfolded the paper. The handwriting hit her like a punch to the chest. Loopy, half cursive, the kind that tried to be adult before it was ready. The words were faded, but legible. Dear Miss Monroe, I know you tried your best. I hope one day someone knows my dad was innocent. Maybe not now, maybe not for a long time, but truth always floats back. Thank you for being kind when no one else was. Tell Elise I liked her poems. It was signed, simply, D.L. Evelyn's breath caught. She read it again, then a third time. Her fingers trembled, her chest tightened. This letter was from a boy named Daniel Lawrence, the son of Anthony Lawrence, the man she had sentenced to life in prison 17 years ago. Her memory surged like a broken dam. The case had been brutal. Anthony Lawrence had been charged with murder after a botched convenience store robbery. There had been circumstantial evidence, but no hard proof. Evelyn had fought to delay the sentencing. She'd tried to get the appeals judge to intervene, but in the end, she had no choice. She gave the ruling. The media had crucified her for hesitating, and in the years since, she'd locked the whole mess into a mental vault and thrown away the key. "How?" she began. "Where did you get this?" Micah said nothing. "Who gave you this? Daniel? He'd be in his 30s now. How would you know him?" Micah looked out toward the water. "I told you, I know enough." Her voice rose now, cracking with something between panic and fury. "You think this is funny? You come here and drop ghosts at my feet like you're some kind of prophet?" "No," he said gently. "Not a prophet, just someone who listens." "To what?" "To people like you. People who stopped talking years ago but never stopped screaming inside." She hated that he was right. She hated him for saying the things Elise used to say when Evelyn would come home shaking from a verdict. "You shouldn't have that letter," she said sharply. "That letter was never sent. It was sealed in the court archives." Micah gave a small shrug. "Maybe someone left it where it needed to be found." She stared at him like he might unravel before her eyes. "This is manipulation," she hissed. "You want something. What is it? Money? Fame?" "I don't want anything," he said. "I just wanted to remind you that not everything you tried to bury stayed dead." Her jaw clenched. Her throat burned. "You should go," she said. "Don't come back." "I understand," he said, rising. "But you'll be here tomorrow. Don't assume you know me." Micah tilted his head. "I don't assume. I believe. There's a difference." He turned, just like the day before, and walked down the path, his silhouette smaller with each step. Evelyn didn't call after him. She didn't even blink. But the letter remained in her lap. When Marla returned to take her inside, Evelyn didn't speak a word. That night, she sat at her desk, her old oak desk with the brass edges, and unfolded the letter again. She laid it beside a framed photo of Elise, who smiled back with bright eyes and a poet's mouth. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me," she whispered to the photo. "But I'm listening now." She placed the letter inside the drawer. Then, with trembling fingers, she picked up a pen. And, for the first time in almost 2 decades, she wrote, "To the son of a man, I may have failed." The morning after Evelyn began her letter, she woke with a strange weightlessness in her chest, as though something had been pried loose. It wasn't peace, not yet, but perhaps a tremor in the stone she'd built around her conscience. The sky was gray, with scattered clouds that rolled in and out like drifting memories. She dressed with Marla's help, allowed the tea to sit on her tongue a little longer, and even looked in the mirror for more than a second. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. The lines were deeper, the eyes dimmer, but the reflection didn't seem absent. There was someone there again. That afternoon, Evelyn didn't wait to be rolled out. She called for Marla 15 minutes early, asked for a blanket, and requested her hardcover notebook, the one she hadn't opened since Elise's funeral. When she was settled beneath the sycamore tree, her lap warmed by the blanket and the notebook resting above it, she looked around as though expecting the wind to whisper a name. She didn't know what she'd say to Micah if he returned, but she knew she'd be ready. Micah appeared, as if conjured by thought alone. No dramatic entrance, no magical aura, just the soft, expected crunch of those worn sandals against gravel. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked over, sat down beside her again like he had every right to be there, and offered her half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She took it with a raised eyebrow, but said nothing. "What's this?" she asked, not unkindly. "Peanut butter and honey," he said. "Old recipe, my mom's." Evelyn gave it a skeptical look, then took a small bite. Sweet, salty, soft. She chewed slowly, surprised by how long it had been since food actually tasted like anything. They ate in silence. The birds were louder today, as if singing for someone they didn't expect to return. "Micah," she said after a while, "how did you get that letter?" "I told you. I found it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Evelyn took another bite, not because she was hungry, but because it gave her a reason to pause before asking the next question. "Do you know Daniel Lawrence?" He looked out toward the pond. "No, but I know who he was." "Was?" Micah didn't blink. "He died 6 years ago. Car crash. Didn't make the news. Just another name in a long list." The sandwich turned to dust in her mouth. He was just a kid when I... She stopped herself. Admitting guilt wasn't something that came easily to Evelyn Monroe. "He forgave you," Micah said, his voice even, soft. "That's what the letter was for. You speak like you were there." "I read it like I was meant to be." She set the sandwich aside. Her hands were trembling again. "I think you know more than you're telling me." "I do." "Then tell me." Micah finally turned to look at her. There was no malice in his gaze, no judgment, just that unshakable peace again. "Do you remember the Holloway case?" The name hit her like a splash of ice water. Of course she remembered it. Everyone remembered it. 8 years ago, the Holloway case had torn the city apart. A child murdered in a local park. A man named Deshaun Holloway arrested on flimsy evidence and a forced confession. Evelyn had presided over the preliminary hearings, but she hadn't stayed for the trial. She recused herself, quietly, strategically, after protests began to build. Her public reasoning had been to protect the court's impartiality. The real reason? Elise. Her daughter had begged her to step away, had cried in her arms, saying, "You're about to let another innocent man fall, Mom. Don't do it again." "I stepped down," Evelyn said. "I didn't sentence him." "But you made sure the case stayed on track," Micah replied. "You knew the prosecution was faulty. You knew the confession didn't hold, but you let it go." She stared at him, heart pounding. "How do you know that?" He reached into his hoodie again and pulled out a folded court docket. "Original. Watermarked, stamped." "Where did you get this?" she asked, a little louder now. "This isn't public record anymore. The appeal sealed it." "I found it," he said again. "You keep saying that," she snapped. "Where? How? Who gave you this?" Micah stood slowly and walked over to the bench across from her. He sat facing her, back straight, hands on his knees. "You know what people always forget," he said, "that the truth has a scent. You can try to bury it under years and paper and silence, but it always leaves something behind. Like smoke in old curtains, like blood in tile grout." Evelyn shivered. She hated how right he sounded. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to remember what justice is," he replied. "Not just what the law says it is, not just what the courts define. The kind your daughter believed in, the kind that made her cry at your feet." The mention of Elise nearly shattered her. She gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Don't talk about her like you knew her." Micah tilted his head slightly. "She carried a journal, black leather, gold ribbon bookmark. She used to read from it out loud at protests." "Did you ever read it?" Evelyn stared. She couldn't breathe. No one had seen Elise read from that journal. She had only ever recited it to small crowds, mostly students, mostly strangers. "How do you know that?" she asked, voice cracking. "I was there," he said. "Not then, but later. I read her words." She didn't understand. Or maybe she did and refused to accept it. "You keep acting like this is all some divine plan, like you were sent here." He didn't answer. "What are you, Micah?" she asked. "I'm just a boy," he said. "But I carry the weight of men you forgot, boys like Daniel, voices like Elise's, and I came to remind you that not all justice is written in ink." Evelyn leaned back, overwhelmed. The wind had picked up, and the rustling of the leaves sounded almost like whispers, 1,000 voices rising in gentle protest. "I tried to fix it," she murmured. "I tried so hard to be fair." "But you were scared," he said. She nodded. and ashamed. Yes. Micah stood again. Then it's time to stop hiding behind silence. She looked at him then, not as a judge, not as an old woman in a wheelchair, but as a mother, as a human being who had failed and was still breathing. I don't know how to begin, she said. You already have, Micah said softly. You wrote the letter. You came here. You're talking. She looked down at her hands. For the first time in years, they weren't shaking from fear, but from the sheer flood of emotion rushing back in. I think I need to say their names, she whispered. All the ones I never said out loud. The ones I buried with my rulings. Micah nodded. Say them. And so she did. Daniel Lawrence, Deshaun Holloway, Elise Monroe. Name after name, she spoke them like prayers, like confessions, like pieces of herself finally released into the wind. Micah didn't interrupt. He simply sat nearby, silent, present, a witness to something sacred. When she finished, the sun had dipped low. The fountain gurgled behind her like it always had. But the air felt clearer, her chest lighter. Micah stepped forward. There's more to uncover, more to say, but not today. She looked up at him. Will you come back? I always do, he said with a smile. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the path, that familiar sway in his step, the sun framing his silhouette like an old photograph. Evelyn remained where she was, eyes closed, the wind dancing across her face. She didn't cry, not yet, but for the first time in decades she wanted to. That night, Evelyn Monroe dreamed of fire again, but this time she wasn't sitting in a courtroom. She was in her childhood bedroom, the wallpaper peeling in soft curls, the lace curtains breathing with the wind. A clock ticked somewhere, impossibly loud. She stood barefoot on the wooden floor, watching a small figure standing in the corner with their back turned. At first, she thought it was Elise. The height, the slender shoulders, the dark hair, but when the figure turned, it was Micah. His eyes were glowing, not with light, but with knowing. You forgot, he said. Forgot what? Evelyn whispered. Your own name. She opened her mouth to speak, but found she had none. No name, no voice. The fire licked at the corners of the room, and Micah began to fade, his outline smudging like chalk in rain. She reached for him, but her legs wouldn't move. The floor cracked open, and she fell. She woke with a gasp. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. Her room was dark except for the sliver of moonlight slicing across the rug. She sat up, her body aching in places that hadn't ached in years. She didn't call for Marla, didn't reach for her pills. Instead, she stared at the shadows and whispered into the quiet, What do you want from me? No answer came, just the low hum of silence. She didn't sleep again. When morning arrived, she surprised Marla by asking for coffee instead of tea and requesting her brown overcoat, the one she hadn't worn since Elise's funeral. The sleeves were a little loose now, her wrists thinner, but it felt like armor, something old but strong. I want to go into town, she said. Marla blinked. Ma'am? You heard me. 10 minutes later, Evelyn was in the back of her own car, the one that hadn't moved from the garage in months. Marla drove slowly, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Evelyn said nothing during the ride. She watched the passing trees, the rooftops peeking above fences, the flicker of bicycles and people she didn't recognize anymore. Fallridge had changed, or maybe she had. When they arrived at the old courthouse, Evelyn insisted on being rolled through the front entrance, not the side ramp. She wanted to feel the marble under her wheels, the weight of the pillars, the echo of steps and memory. Inside, she asked to see the archive clerk. A young woman named Kendall came out, blinking behind thick glasses. May I help you? I'm looking for sealed records, Evelyn said, specifically the Holloway trial. Kendall's mouth opened and closed. That case was sealed by the appellate court. No access without— I know what it was sealed under, Evelyn interrupted. I'm the one who filed the motion, but I'm not asking. I'm telling. You'll open it today." Kendall paled. She hesitated, then disappeared behind the doors. 30 minutes passed before a cart arrived, loaded with 6 boxes marked Holloway V's Estate. Evelyn's hands shook as she opened the first one, not from age or illness, but from the weight of returning to a place she'd buried beneath steel and silence. The files were just as she remembered: affidavits, photos, testimony transcripts, the prosecution's notes, a grainy image of the bloodied swing set where the child had been found, and, buried near the bottom, an internal memo, never filed into evidence. Handwritten by an officer named Bowers. It read, "Subject appeared disoriented. Confession was coerced under threat of longer sentencing. We were ordered to close the case before media fallout escalated. Suspect did not match witness description." Evelyn stared at it, bile rising in her throat. This one piece of paper could have changed everything, but it had been quietly excluded, swept away, and she hadn't asked enough questions. She rolled back from the table, her hands trembling. Marla reached out, but Evelyn waved her off. She needed to sit with it, needed to feel every inch of her failure. Later that afternoon, she sat again under the sycamore tree. The air was still, the light dim. Her eyes burned from hours of reading, her heart heavier than it had been in years. Micah didn't come at first. She wasn't sure he would. But at 4:08 she heard the footsteps. He appeared from the woods this time, like a shadow that had taken shape. He carried no bag, no paper, just his presence. "You went looking," he said, sitting across from her. "I did," she replied. "And what did you find?" "Myself," she said slowly, or what I tried to forget I was. Micah nodded once as if this were a normal thing to say. "And what are you?" She looked up, eyes burning. "A coward." "No," he said softly. "You were scared. That's not the same." "I let fear decide who lived and who suffered," she snapped. "I let my fear bury evidence, bury my daughter's voice, bury Daniel's name." "Daniel forgave you," Micah interrupted gently. "And what about Deshawn? What about Elise?" Her voice cracked. "You talk about forgiveness like it's a blanket we can throw over bloodstains." He leaned forward. "Forgiveness isn't erasure. It's remembrance without paralysis." She stared at him. "You sound like Elise." He smiled. "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't smile like you know her." "I do," he said simply. "How?" Micah didn't answer. He reached into his hoodie and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. He passed it to her silently. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she opened it. It was Elise's journal, the real one. She flipped through the pages, recognizing her daughter's slanted script, the little hearts she drew beside certain words, the poems written in the margins. One entry was dated 2 weeks before Elise died. "I met a boy on the courthouse steps today. He said my words reminded him of church. That made me cry. I think I needed someone to see me as more than angry. Maybe there's still light in this place." Evelyn choked back a sob. Micah said nothing. She kept flipping until she reached the last page. "If anyone ever finds this, please tell my mother I knew she was trying, even when she failed, especially then. She was always trying." Tears spilled freely now. Evelyn pressed the journal to her chest, her breath ragged. How do you have this?" Micah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Someone left it, where I could find it." "Who?" "I don't know," he said, "but it felt like it was waiting for me." Evelyn looked at him again, not like a judge, not like a skeptic, but like a mother, like a soul unraveling. "I miss her every single day," she whispered. "I would trade everything to have her back." Micah nodded. "She knows." "Is that why you're here?" she asked. "To tell me that?" "No," he said gently. "I'm here so you stop whispering it to the dark and start saying it out loud." She stared at him, the wind curling around them like an embrace. "You're not just a boy, are you?" He tilted his head. Maybe I'm just the part of you that refused to die with her. The journal sat heavy in her lap. She ran her thumb over Elise's name, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to grieve without resistance. The tears came not like a flood, but like a thaw, slow, persistent, inevitable. Micah reached out, not to touch her, but to offer presence. "You're not alone," he said. "I feel like I am," she replied. "That's because grief builds walls, but love doesn't ask for doors." Evelyn laughed. A broken sound, but real. She looked up at the sky. It was glowing with the last blush of sunset, the kind of color Elise used to chase with her camera. "When you're not here," she said, "do you go anywhere?" Micah smiled. "Sometimes I go where the silence needs company." She nodded. "Will I see you again?" "I'll be near," he said. As he stood to leave, she called out, "Micah." He turned. "Who are you, really?" He gave her a soft smile. "Just someone reminding you how to breathe again." And with that, he walked into the dusk, his silhouette swallowed by light and trees. Evelyn clutched the journal, the sycamore leaves trembling above her like a breath being held. For the first time since Elise died, she inhaled deeply, and she didn't feel guilty for exhaling. The next morning, Evelyn Monroe didn't wait for Marla. She rose earlier than usual, her breath visible in the chilled morning light that seeped in through the curtains. Something was shifting in her body. Not just a stirring of hope, but a command, a call. She felt it deep in her spine, in her chest, in the very air surrounding her as if it had been humming all along, and she had only just begun to hear it. She dressed slowly, deliberately. Her old court pin, a small gold scale she hadn't touched in years. She clipped it to her coat. Not because she was proud of it, but because it reminded her of who she used to be and who she might still need to answer to. Before she called Marla, she wrote a single sentence on the notepad by her bedside. "Truth is heavier when it waits too long." By 10 a.m., she was parked outside the City Records building, Marla fidgeting beside her, unsure why they were here or what her employer was chasing now. Evelyn asked her to wait in the car. The building was old and mostly forgotten, housing floor upon floor of dust-lined archives and aging clerks who still believed in paper. Evelyn wheeled herself up the long ramp to the third floor, where the public records office still smelled of toner ink and yellowed manila folders. She asked for access to the sealed files connected to State Visa's Holloway and Monroe Visa's Internal Ethics Board. The latter surprised the clerk. "That file was sealed permanently, ma'am," she said, peering over her glasses. Evelyn fixed her with a look so firm and full of legacy. The woman simply nodded and stepped away without further argument. When the boxes arrived, Evelyn began to dig, deeper than she had ever dared. She wasn't looking for absolution. She was looking for blood, her own, her fingerprints, her guilt. She found it. In the margin of an ethics review memo, scrawled in her own hand, barely legible, "Recused, but too late. Elise warned me, ignored." The words hit her like a blade. Her hands trembled as she flipped through more pages, finding correspondence she'd buried in the fog of her guilt. Letters Elise had written to advocacy groups, notes she'd gathered about the judge who replaced her on the Holloway trial, a man with clear ties to the mayor's re-election campaign. This wasn't just a tragedy. It had been a machine, greased with silence, driven by fear, and she had been part of it. Evelyn closed the box and wheeled herself outside without a word. Marla offered to help, but Evelyn shook her head and said only, "Take me to the park." The sycamore tree stood waiting, its limbs gently stirring in the wind like it had been stretching since sunrise. The sky had turned a deep gray, clouds threatening rain. Evelyn didn't care. She sat there for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the trail, the fountain, the stone path. She didn't know if Micah would come. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he had already given her what he was meant to. Maybe he never existed. But at 12:17 p.m., he appeared. Not from the woods, not from the trail, but from the far side of the lawn, calm, steady, like he'd been walking toward her for a very long time. She didn't speak until he sat down. "I found it all," she said quietly. "The files, the notes, my daughter's words, my own cowardice." Micah didn't respond. He just looked at her, waiting. "I let the Holloway case happen because I didn't want to be ruined," she said. "Elise knew. She told me. She begged me to fight. I was too afraid. Of the press, of the system, of being wrong." "You weren't wrong," Micah said gently. "You were human. But now you get to be something else." She looked up. "Like what?" "Honest." The word hung in the air like incense, sharp and purifying. Evelyn took a deep breath. "I want to make it right." Micah raised an eyebrow. "How?" "I don't know. Yet. But it starts with a voice. And I still have one." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer all along. Then he reached into his hoodie and pulled out something that made Evelyn's breath catch. A USB drive. She stared at it, hesitant. "What is that?" "Evidence," he said. "Video. Audio. Things no one wanted seen or heard." "Where did you get this?" "I didn't steal it," Micah said, smiling faintly. "It found me." She hesitated, then took the drive. It felt warm in her palm, like it had been carried through fire. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at her old laptop. The screen flickered to life, and the files on the USB began to open one by one. A recording of a prosecutor laughing during a private dinner, mocking the Holloway family. A judge whispering, "He fits the profile. What more do they want?" A shaky video of Elise, standing in a small circle of college students, reading from her journal. Her voice cracked halfway through a poem called My Mother's Silence. Evelyn cried openly now, not from grief, from clarity. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote. She crafted a statement, not for the courts, but for the world. She wrote until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred. The next morning, she called a reporter who had once tried to get her to speak years ago. A woman Elise had admired. Evelyn asked her to meet at the park. Under the sycamore tree, Evelyn read the entire statement aloud, her voice firm, unapologetic. She admitted everything, her failings, the corruption she'd ignored, the truths Elise had tried to share. She named names, spoke of Daniel Lawrence, Deshaun Holloway, and of Micah, the mysterious boy who reminded her that silence is not the same as peace. The video went viral within hours. Evelyn Monroe, the iron gavel, had shattered her own silence. The legal system reeled. Old cases reopened. Whispers turned into headlines. And somewhere in that chaos, people began to remember Elise Monroe, not just as a daughter lost, but as a voice never fully heard. 3 days later, Evelyn returned to the park. This time, she didn't bring a speech. She brought a white rose and placed it at the base of the sycamore. Micah didn't come. She waited for hours, watching the wind carry petals across the grass, but the bench remained empty. She returned the next day, and the next. Still no Micah. On the 4th day, she found something on the bench. A small, folded piece of paper weighed down by a smooth stone. She unfolded it with trembling hands. It read, "The wind knows when the work is done. I'm proud of you. M." Evelyn pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. The wind picked up, and for the first time since her legs gave out years ago, she felt the muscles in her right thigh twitch. Just a flicker, a forgotten signal, an ancient spark. She opened her eyes, stood slowly, without the chair, wobbling but upright. A gasp escaped her lips, half wonder, half disbelief. The rose fell from her lap, landing at her feet. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't care she was standing. And for the first time in years, she wasn't standing for justice. She was standing for truth. The storm rolled in without warning. By afternoon, the sky above Fallridge had turned the color of bruised slate. Thunder murmured low across the horizon, and the leaves on the sycamore tree flipped their pale undersides to the wind as if bracing for what was coming. Evelyn Monroe now standing without the aid of her wheelchair, leaned against the stone fountain in the park, her breath shallow but steady. Her legs trembled beneath her like a fawn's first attempt to rise, but they held. She hadn't told Marla, hadn't told anyone. She wasn't sure they'd believe her, and more than that, she wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. For now, this moment was hers alone. But the wind had other plans. The first drop of rain kissed her cheek like a soft warning, then another, and then the sky opened, pouring down in the thick sheets. The fountain gurgled louder as water splashed against stone. Evelyn didn't move. The chill sank through her coat, soaking the fabric, clinging to her skin. Still, she stayed rooted. Her legs wobbled, threatened to buckle, but she refused. She had spent too many years frozen. Now she would not retreat. She raised her head as the storm roared, and in the howling wind, she heard it again, the soft crunch of gravel. She turned. Micah was there. He wasn't wet. Somehow, the rain didn't seem to touch him. His hoodie wasn't drenched. His shoes weren't muddy. He looked the same as he always did, calm, still, otherworldly. Evelyn couldn't speak at first. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and something deeper, reverence. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, her voice thin against the storm. "I never left," he answered, stepping closer. "You just didn't need me to see me until now." Lightning split the sky behind him, followed seconds later by a roar of thunder that shook the trees. Evelyn swayed. Micah stepped forward and reached out, not to catch her, but to steady her with presence alone. "Why now?" she asked. "Why this storm? What is this?" He looked at her, his eyes darker than before, but not with menace, only depth. "Storms come when we stop pretending the sky is clear." She laughed, a short, cracked sound. "I've spent my whole life pretending." "And now you've stopped," he said. "That's why your legs moved. Not because of prayer, not because of punishment, but because you finally told the truth." She nodded slowly, water dripping from her hair, soaking the journal still clutched in her coat pocket. "Elise," she whispered. "I miss her more now than I ever allowed myself to." Micah took a step closer. "Because you finally stopped running from her?" Evelyn closed her eyes. Rain trickled down her neck, mixing with tears she didn't wipe away. She thought of Elise's poems, the ones she never read until after she died. She thought of the time Elise stayed up all night to make protest signs, then fell asleep on the kitchen floor beside her ink-stained fingers. She thought of how Elise used to hum under her breath when nervous, a sound Evelyn hadn't heard in a decade but suddenly remembered with painful clarity. "I blamed the system," she whispered. "I blamed the other judges, the politicians, the press, but I never blamed myself. And I should have." "No," Micah said gently. "You should have forgiven yourself. There's a difference." Evelyn opened her eyes. "How do I do that?" "By standing in the storm," he said. "Exactly like you're doing now." A gust of wind tore through the park, nearly knocking her down. She stumbled, fell to one knee, her hand scraping across the cold stone. Pain radiated through her hip and shoulder, but she didn't cry out. Micah knelt beside her, his voice low. "Can I pray with you now?" She didn't hesitate this time. She nodded. Together, in the pouring rain, she bowed her head. Her hand found his. It was warm, warmer than seemed possible in such weather. Micah closed his eyes. "God," he said softly. "She's ready. She's walked the long road of silence. She's bled from it, hid in it, carried the weight of her mistakes like chains. But now she's standing. Now she's remembering. So we ask, not for miracles, not for signs, but for peace and strength to keep walking." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "Amen," she whispered. When she looked up, something shifted in the air. The rain didn't stop, but it softened. The thunder rumbled farther away, like a lion retreating into the forest. Micah helped her rise again. This time, her legs held stronger. "You said I wouldn't walk until I was honest," she said. "I never realized how many lies I told myself." "We all do," he replied. But healing doesn't need perfection, just truth. She looked at him, truly looked. Micah, who are you really? No riddles? He didn't smile. I'm part of the story you tried to forget. Part of the voice you buried with your daughter's journal. I'm a shadow of justice, a flicker of memory. I'm no one special. Don't lie to me now, she said softly. He paused, then reached into his coat and handed her something small. A pendant. Her husband's pendant. The one he wore every day before he was gunned down. The one that went missing and was never recovered. A silver medallion with Latin etched around the edge. She stared at it, stunned. Where did you find this? It was waiting, Micah said. Like everything else. I don't understand. Maybe you don't need to, he said. Maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe remembering is. He turned to go, but Evelyn reached out. Will I see you again? Micah paused. Rain dripped from the tips of the tree branches around him. I think you already have. And then he walked into the rain, his figure dissolving not into mist or magic, but into the rhythm of the world. As if he belonged not to a single place, but to every place where silence had taken root and someone dared to speak. Evelyn didn't chase after him. She stood beneath the sycamore, soaked and shaking, and slowly took her first real step forward. No cane, no chair, just her. The storm faded, leaving behind puddles like mirrors scattered across the path. She caught a glimpse of herself in one, older, yes, but alive, present. And behind her reflection, for just a second, she thought she saw a girl with dark hair and a bright smile standing in the rain, laughing. Elise. She smiled back. That night, Evelyn slept without dreams, and for the first time in over a decade, she woke up not to guilt, not to dread, but to morning, and the quiet certainty that she could walk again, because she had chosen to stand in the storm and not run. Because truth, once spoken, no longer needed to chase her. It walked beside her now, just like Micah had. The sunlight came slowly the next morning, as if unsure whether it was welcome. It filtered gently through Evelyn Monroe's bedroom window, brushing its golden fingers across her quilted blanket and the leather-bound journal that now slept on her nightstand like a trusted companion. She opened her eyes before the warmth reached her skin, her breathing calm, her body still aching but undeniably awake. No dreams had visited her that night, just silence. But not the kind that haunted. This was a stillness that whispered peace. She sat up on her own, letting her feet rest on the floor, the cold wood grounding her in a way she had once feared. No one had to lift her today. No one had to guide her step. With slow determination, she stood, testing the muscles she thought had forgotten her. They trembled, but obeyed. And that was enough. Marla gasped when she came in with the tea. "Ma'am," she said, wide-eyed, "you're—" "Walking," Evelyn said, almost matter-of-factly. "Yes." She took the cup with a steady hand and smiled. "Don't look so terrified." "But how?" Evelyn glanced toward the window, where the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. "Faith," she said simply, "and truth. Both are heavier than they look." By noon, the press was at her door. The video from the park had gone viral, her public confession. Her trembling voice, her standing without assistance. The story had exploded across news channels and blogs, social media threads and political panels. It wasn't just about a retired judge finding her footing again. It was about a system cracking open. People wanted to hear more. Evelyn agreed. She held a press conference from her living room. No podium, no dramatic backdrop. Just her, in her favorite armchair, with Elise's journal in her lap and a pendant around her neck. She answered questions with clarity and composure. She didn't hide. She didn't hedge. When asked what sparked her transformation, she didn't name Micah directly. She simply said, "Someone reminded me that silence isn't strength, and that guilt can either bury you or plant you. I chose to grow." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn became an unexpected symbol. Former colleagues reached out in private, some offering apologies, some asking for guidance. Students mailed her handwritten notes, thanking her for speaking what others wouldn't. Families of the wrongly convicted found her address and sent her photos of the loved ones they still hoped to free. She read every word, but fame was never her goal. Justice was. She launched the Elise Monroe Initiative, a legal aid foundation focused on re-examining wrongful convictions, offering scholarships to young advocates, and building a digital archive of cases like Holloway's. Her first public donation was to the Lawrence family, along with a letter handwritten by Evelyn herself. "Your son's letter helped me remember who I was meant to be. I pray this helps you remember who he was too." As the foundation grew, Evelyn became a fixture at hearings and academic panels. She didn't take the stage as a savior, but as a cautionary tale. "Don't become me," she told law students. "Become who I should have been." Through it all, she continued her daily walks to the park. The sycamore tree had become her cathedral. Some days she brought flowers, others books, but always she brought a sandwich, peanut butter and honey, wrapped carefully and left on the bench beside her. She never saw Micah again. Not in the usual sense, but sometimes in the hush before sunset, she swore she heard his sandals in the gravel. Sometimes the sandwich would be gone. Once she found a note. "You've done well. Keep walking. M." She framed it and placed it beside Elise's photo on the mantel. Then came the day the governor called. They offered her a position, honorary, of course, on the State Review Board for Judicial Ethics. A title, a seat, a symbol of reconciliation. She said no. Instead, she offered them a proposal. Open a new division within the state court to independently investigate prosecutorial misconduct, funded by the Elise Monroe Initiative and overseen by a civilian committee. It was bold, controversial, politically risky, but the public outcry made it impossible to ignore. The court agreed. On the day the division was inaugurated, Evelyn stood beside the mayor, a woman she once privately criticized for being all talk. Now, the two exchanged a quiet look, an understanding that justice, too, could evolve. That evening, Evelyn returned to the park one more time. It was early spring. The blossoms on the sycamore tree had begun to open, small and pale and full of promise. She walked without her cane, a bouquet of forget-me-nots in one hand and Elise's journal in the other. The bench was empty. She didn't mind. She sat down slowly, the flowers resting in her lap, and opened the journal to a blank page. She hadn't written in it before. It had always felt sacred, Elise's voice, not hers. But now, she knew that legacies were meant to continue, not calcify. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Elise, I used to walk in silence thinking it was strength. Now I know better. You taught me that truth is the only kind of love that lasts. I miss you. I see you in the wind, in the storms, in the soft eyes of a boy who reminded me how to breathe. I promise I will keep walking. For you, for him, for all of us." She signed it with a single initial, E. Then, as the wind picked up and scattered the petals at her feet, she stood, slowly, surely. The sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the stone path. From a distance, a little girl's laughter echoed through the park. Evelyn turned her head, smiling. It wasn't Elise, but it felt like her. She left the journal closed on the bench that day, tucked beneath the bouquet, as if offering her story to someone else who might need it. Then she walked away, her steps firm, her heart light. A breeze lifted through the sycamore's branches, carrying a single whisper. She remembered. And the world, for a moment, seemed to breathe with her. It was on the first truly warm day of summer that Evelyn Monroe returned to the park, not for a speech, not for remembrance, not even for closure. This time, she came simply to sit. No cameras, no notes, no voice recorders waiting to capture the sound of redemption. She wore a light blue scarf Elise once gave her, frayed now at the ends but soft, as if it had absorbed her daughter's laughter over the years and held it gently in its threads. Her steps were steady. The bench by the sycamore was unoccupied, just the way she hoped it would be. Birdsong shimmered in the air, and the trees swayed with the easy rhythm of peace. Children played in the distance, their joyful squeals colliding with the bubbling murmur of the fountain. Evelyn eased herself down, placing a small parcel beside her, a journal, blank, waiting, and a thermos of tea. She looked around. She didn't expect to see Micah again, not after all that had happened. He had never made promises, never said goodbye, never left a forwarding address to the heart. But in the way the sunlight filtered through the branches, in the hush of the wind between each bird song, she felt him. It had been 4 months since she released her public confession, since she stood in the storm with knees trembling and spine straight, since she admitted aloud what she had spent decades burying, that she had failed, that she had been silent when she should have spoken, that fear had dressed itself as duty and shame as professionalism. But from that storm came movement. Since then, the Justice Division she had championed had already reopened 6 cases. 2 of them, cases from her own bench, had resulted in full exonerations. Evelyn had traveled to the prison gates herself, not to be photographed, but to look the families in the eye. She had said one thing to each of them. "I'm sorry I wasn't who you needed back then. I promise I'll be who others need now." That morning, a letter had arrived from Deshawn Holloway's sister. It sat folded in her coat pocket, unread. She wanted to open it here, in this place where everything had started and unraveled, and then, strangely, stitched itself back together again. With careful hands, she pulled it out and unfolded the creased paper. Dear Ms. Monroe, you don't know me, but I remember you. I remember your face on the news, your voice in court. I used to curse that face every night. I thought it was the face of a woman who buried my brother alive. I held on to that hate like it was the only thing keeping me breathing. But then, last month I saw a different face on the screen. One that looked older, yes, but somehow clearer, lighter. You said his name, my brother's name. Not like it was an obligation, like it mattered. You gave us back something we thought was lost, his truth. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do. I deserve peace, and so do you. With respect, Lena Holloway. Evelyn stared at the paper, her eyes burning, her chest full. Forgiveness was never hers to claim, but to receive it, freely, without begging, without expectation, felt like being handed a key to a room she hadn't entered in years. She folded the letter again and slipped it into the blank journal beside her. Then she opened the cover and wrote, Today, I was forgiven by someone I hurt. I don't know what I did to deserve such mercy, but I know now that mercy doesn't come when we're perfect. It comes when we finally stop pretending we are. The wind stirred the pages. She closed the book, looked up, and let her gaze rest on the path where Micah had once appeared, where he had stood in his dusty hoodie, mismatched sandals, and eyes that seemed to hold the sky. Evelyn no longer wondered where he had come from. Some questions, she'd learned, were better held than answered. Still, today felt like a day for miracles. So when she heard footsteps, those familiar, light, deliberate footsteps, she didn't look away. A boy approached. He wasn't Micah. Too tall, too clean, but in his hand he held something wrapped in newspaper. He looked around hesitantly, then caught her eye and walked over. "Are you Evelyn Monroe?" he asked. She nodded. "I am." "This is for you," he said, holding out the parcel. "A guy gave it to me last week. Said if I saw a lady sitting here with a blue scarf and tea, I should give this to her." Her heart skipped. What did he look like? The boy shrugged. Like he'd been walking for a long time. Evelyn smiled. "Thank you." He walked off before she could ask more. She unwrapped the paper slowly, her hands suddenly unsure. Inside was a worn photograph. It showed a girl, no older than 20, standing on the courthouse steps, mid-laugh, with her journal clutched to her chest. Elise. She recognized the curve of her daughter's smile immediately, the tilt of her head, the way she leaned into sunlight. On the back, written in faded ink, she spoke with fire and love, "She is not gone. Neither are you." M. Evelyn's breath caught. She pressed the photo to her heart, closed her eyes and let the warmth rise through her ribs, her throat, her fingertips. She stayed there for hours, watching, listening, breathing. When the sun began to fall behind the hills, she stood, gathered her things, and placed the new journal on the bench. She left the photo inside, between its pages. It would wait there for someone else, someone angry, or grieving, or tired of silence, someone ready to speak. She walked away slowly, hands free, steps light. And as she crossed beneath the sycamore's arms, she whispered, "Thank you," to Elise, to Lena, to Micah, to the storm, to the silence that had once caged her, and to the voice that finally taught her how to walk free. She didn't look back, not because she was finished, but because the road forward, at last, felt open. Sometimes the most powerful journeys don't involve miles traveled, but truths faced. Evelyn Monroe's story reminds us that silence, even when well-intended, can become a prison. Her decades of quiet guilt, her refusal to confront painful mistakes, and her fear of being wrong kept her not just in a wheelchair, but in emotional exile. It wasn't her body that had given up. It was her soul. But the beauty of her transformation lies in one word: honesty. When Evelyn finally allowed herself to face her failures, to name her fears, and to say aloud the names of those she had hurt, something extraordinary happened. Not just inside her, but around her. Truth, when spoken, doesn't destroy us. It frees us. We also learned from Micah, a mysterious boy who never demanded anything yet changed everything, that healing often arrives through unexpected messengers. Whether he was real, spiritual, symbolic, or all of the above, he represented the quiet nudge many of us need. That small voice whispering, "You're not finished yet." Forgiveness, as Evelyn discovered, is not always given by others first. Sometimes we must give it to ourselves, and when we do, the world begins to shift. Storms clear, legs move, hearts soften. We walk again, not because we're healed, but because we're willing. Let this story be your reminder. It's never too late to speak up. It's never too late to change course. And no matter how heavy your past may feel, it is not heavier than the truth you are brave enough to carry forward. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your story. Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful and emotional stories like this one. Until next time, stay true, stay kind, and keep walking.